And as that same testimony makes unmistakably clear, some of the most powerful forces that can change North Korea is not military force, but information. Information changes people, ultimately change society. And that brings us to the deeply troubling actions of the government of Korea. For almost 40 years, the United States government and the Congress have considered South Korea as a model democratic ally and a partner in advancing human rights. Yet developments in the past years raise serious concerns about democratic backsliding. These concerns include the government's poor treatment of the North Korean human rights movement, but extend to the Lee government violations of core freedoms within South Korea. The Lee government has taken a series of steps that have had the effect of constraining human rights advocacy related to North Korea. And these include disbanding the Ministry of Unification's Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs Office, withholding its annual North Korean human rights report from public release, halting government-sponsored broadcasts into North Korea, and supporting legislation that allows police to block activists from sending information, such as leaflets and digital media, into North Korea. These are not minor administrative adjustments. These are actions that directly affect the ability of civil society, especially defector-led organizations, to carry out one of the most effective forms of engagement with the people of North Korea, the transmission of information. We will also hear testimony that enforced actions have gone further, targeting activists, restricting access to launch sites, increasing surveillance, and creating a chilling effect on those engaged in this vital human rights work. Dr. Taro likewise raises serious concerns about the trajectory of freedom within South Korea itself, describing, quote, more and more restrictions on the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and other freedoms, warning that these measures are increasingly being codified into law. These developments deserve careful scrutiny. Policies that suppress the flow of information into North Korea or that penalize those seeking to expose the truth are not neutral acts. They have consequences. We need peace on the Korean Peninsula, but we will not deter the North by suppressing the voices of freedom in the South or by limiting fundamental freedoms. The defense of human dignity and human rights are essential to meeting the challenge of the militant North Korean dictatorship. It is in deep commitment to human rights that we find the strength and the stability to responsibly stand up to the nuclear blackmail games played by the Kim dictatorship over North Korea.
I focus on the Korean Peninsula. In my earlier years, I focused on North Korea, but lately I focus on South Korea. This place of freedom, however, is losing its freedom. There are more and more restrictions on freedom in the Republic of Korea. Restrictions on freedom of speech and freedom of religion and other freedoms. Increasingly, the measures to suppress freedom are being codified into law, and now they're trying to change the Constitution. And who are these people who are so focused on eroding freedom in South Korea? They are pro-Chinese Communist Party, pro-CCP, pro-Korean Workers' Party, which is a communist party in North Korea, and they are also anti-Republic of Korea, anti-United States, and anti-Japan. They now control the majority of levers of power in South Korea. So today, I'll highlight 3 areas. 1, the efforts to change the Constitution of the Republic of Korea and to pull it away from a freedom-based democracy and market economy to one that is socialist-based. 2, suppression of freedom of speech. And 3, suppression of freedom of religion. But the Lee Jae-myung administration the Democratic Party of Korea, which is DPK, and its associated political parties are about to change the constitution. The public is not demanding this change. It's only a small segment of the society, specifically those who are pro-CCP and pro-socialism, who want this. But the details of the changes are not available to the public. All these changes show a move away from freedom-based democracy and market economy to socialism, which is about central planning and central distribution. It's about taking the choices and decision-making away from individuals and concentrating them centrally in the government. It's about eroding individual freedom. That's because the state makes all the decisions, just like in North Korea. Out of all these proposed changes, the DPK made deleting freedom from the Constitution its party platform in 2018. They withdrew their efforts to change the Constitution only after they faced opposition. Then they bided for time. And now they're again trying to change the Constitution to change the fundamental nature of the freedom-based republic. But less obviously this time, by being quiet about the content. They likely have other changes, but one thing is clear. They're trying to change the Constitution quickly. They're trying to pass a law currently to have a referendum to change the Constitution in the upcoming elections, which is a little over a month away. And surprisingly, Chinese citizens who are green card holders, who have lived in South Korea for 3 years, they can vote in the regional elections. Once these Chinese citizens register to vote, they can vote in Korean regional elections even if they live in China. Korean elections, especially since the April 2020 elections, have been mired in election fraud controversies, such as more ballots than registered voters, stacks of pristine and unfolded ballots found in piles in ballot containers, and 3,170 votes in a row going towards one candidate. That's by a ballot counting machine. So the DPK and the Lee Jae-myung administration want to add the referendum to change the Constitution to coincide with the June 3rd elections. More than 80% and 90% in some surveys of South Koreans do not like China, especially after they realize that Chinese influence on domestic politics is so prevalent in South Korea. Banners that criticize the Chinese Communist Party or calls for an investigation into election fraud are labeled as hate speech. And afterwards, they get investigated just as they do in the PRC. At an anti-CCP rally in Korea in October 2025, Korean youth tore up a flag of Communist China. And immediately they were investigated by the police. But when an anti-US group tore up a US flag in front of the US embassy in Seoul, nothing happened to them. No investigations. So this is prejudicial. The National Election Commission, or NEC, even tried to push for a law to punish people who raised concerns about the election fraud. This was revealed in late December 2024. On May 14th, 2025, less than 3 weeks away from the presidential elections, the platform X-Korea suspended the account of a presidential candidate, Hwang Kyo-an, who has been calling for election integrity. On April 16th, 2026, so earlier this month, Jeon Han-gil, he's a history lecturer and a YouTube political commentator. He was handcuffed and taken in by the police. And the reason was defamation of politicians, which included Lee Jae-myung. But he was not even charged with anything. And the police did not have an arrest warrant. In January 2025, DPK lawmaker John Yonggi stated publicly that the DPK will absolutely charge or file charges with the police against anyone who posts comments that they don't like on social media. When the DPK files complaints, the police then take action by starting an investigation. What are the topics that the DPK doesn't approve of? Election fraud issues, such as when someone posts 196-year-old voted, and that's based on the National Election Commission data. Or when people say China interfered in the elections. Or when people write North Korea interfered in the elections. This sounds more like North Korea and the PRC, but this is occurring in South Korea. Under the Lee Jae-myung administration, pastors have been jailed. This is even before any trial. Pastor Sonyeon Bo was arrested and jailed in September 2025. Pastor Son, who organized national prayer rallies against the political tyranny of the pro-CCP, pro-communist factions, was jailed for inviting a conservative education superintendent candidate to his church to speak. They called it a violation of the election law. He faced over 20 lawsuits, many of them filed primarily by the controversial and above-the-law National Election Commission. His church was raided. He was released eventually due to international pressure. In another case, Pastor Jun Kwang-hoon was arrested and jailed earlier this year on January 22nd. He also led prayers and peaceful rallies where people held the ROK and U.S. flags to show support for a strong U.S.-ROK alliance. These are the same tactics that the PRC used against Hong Kong citizens to protest against communism in Hong Kong. Lawfare is used in a different way as well. The DPK recently introduced a bill to suppress freedom of religion. Churches are registered as legal entity in South Korea. Under this proposed bill, the government can revoke the approval that established a legal entity like the church. It also requires the confiscation of church property. Those who want to pass the bill state that these measures apply to churches for interfering in politics. The Korean church strongly opposes this bill, citing that it infringes upon freedom of religion, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. The bill was recently retracted, fortunately, after heavy opposition by Christians. But there's a record of these lawmakers reintroducing the same unconstitutional content in the bills over and over. The Republic of Korea has been seen as a shining example of America's success story. In adopting the American-style freedom-based political and economic system, South Korea thrived. Unlike North Korea, where people lacked freedom and food, South Koreans enjoyed freedom and prosperity. But that's changing. I just provided some examples of suppression of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And those in South Korea who are supportive of the communist parties of China and North Korea, and who are anti-United States, anti-Republic of Korea, and anti-Japan, are trying to change the fundamental nature of the Republic of Korea by deleting freedom from the Constitution and adding a socialist agenda into it, which would essentially turn South Korea into a satellite state of Communist China. While the anti-freedom faction has taken control over levers of power, including the government and the major media, there are South Korean patriots who are desperately fighting against this potential outcome. They don't want Korea to become like Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. They call for CCP out because they don't want to be a vassal state of the PRC. We should listen to them and voice support for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O, for that, for alerting all of us to the tremendous dangers that are right now with regards to the Republic of Korea, that it's quickly evolving into the People's Republic of South Korea, as you said, a satellite state of the People's Republic of China. I mean, why any government like Lee would seek to associate itself with Xi Jinping and his monstrous policies of his human rights abuses is beside me. Same way with Pyongyang. Why would you want to be more like them and not like a freedom, democracy-loving country that we all hope and pray South Korea will go back to? So the importance of this hearing is that we need to mobilize. Your call to action, and Suzanne, Dr. Schulte, I've read her testimony in like manner does it as well. Perhaps all of us, the White House, I know they've expressed concerns, but it has to go to the next level. There's no doubt about that. The nomination has already been put forward for a former member of the House, Michelle Park Steele, who was on the China Commission. I served with her. She'll be outstanding, but we know how slow the ratification process is, or the confirmation process is over on the Senate side. But we need to bring more light scrutiny and a mobilization on our side diplomatically to try to stop this erosion of human rights and democracy in South Korea. So your call to action was extraordinarily effective.